I have a wonderful panel here with us today to discuss AI and teaching. So just to sort of set this up, let me sort of reflect a bit on the role of emerging technologies like AI on our mission. It's the teaching, research, and the operations of the university and the college, what we're doing in the classroom, what we're doing in our research endeavors. So a fundamental question that we've been kicking around is, so how do emerging technologies like AI affect how we do our jobs as faculty members? So a liberal arts education, which is what we deliver on a daily basis, is known for honing critical thinking skills, for developing communication skills, both written and oral, exposing students to the scientific method, sharing cross-cultural experiences, developing creativity and among our students. So all of these activities that we do in the classroom prepare our students to navigate the changing world that they're going to experience for the decades to come, as well as the changing interests that our students will experience throughout their lifetime and their careers. So AI in the classroom really offers opportunities, and it offers some challenges to us. And so this is an opportunity to discuss that with some faculty members from the college. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. I'm Paul Walbeck, Dean of the Columbian College. With us I will rearrange it in the order that people are sitting, so bear with me. All right, so we have D.B. Obler to my left. She is the program head and associate professor of art history. Professor Obler's research and teaching interests include modern and contemporary art and craft from the late 19th century to the present, with emphases on 20th century avant-garde, theories of gender and cross-cultural representation, photography, and disability studies. Next is Matthew Hindman, professor of media and public affairs. His work focuses on political communication, digital audiences, and online disinformation. Dr. Hindman's most recent book, The Internet Trap: How the Digital Economy Builds Monopolies and Undermines Democracy, argues that the internet has not lowered the cost of reaching audiences. It has merely shifted who pays and how. Next up is Jessica McCaughey, an associate professor in the University Writing Program and co-founder and co-director of the Archive of Workplace Writing Experiences, a collection of interviews and resources about workplace writing in America. Her research focuses primarily on the transfer of writing skills from the university to the professional realm. And last but not least is Oleg Kargaltsev, professor of physics. His current research explains that neutron stars and black holes are the sites for some of the most extreme conditions in the universe. By studying these objects, Oleg is hoping to push the understanding of the extreme states of matter in space beyond what can be achieved in the laboratories on Earth. So thank you all for being here and sharing your experience with AI and emerging technologies in the classroom and research and beyond. So let me start with a question. So how do you approach AI technology in your teaching, and why? Why do you take the approach you do? So how and why? All right, so I won't pick on any of you, but I'd love answers from each of you. So who would like to start?
So
All right, you look like.
I'm happy to start. So the emergence of strong AI has, in my own teaching, has forced me to take a step back. And I find myself both embracing it in certain classes and in certain assignments, and going entirely the other direction, being ever more analog in others. So for example, in my Intro to Political Communication class, one thing I have done for years, considered doing away with, and then recommitted to doing basically forever, is a blue book essay exam. 3 years ago, when I ordered more Blue Books on the once-a-decade order, I was informed by office staff that the only people still using them were myself and a senior professor who shall not be named, who's in his 80s, right? I think I have heard since that other people have started to do that. But the choice of Blue Book exams is really driven in this case by what I want the students to do. In that class, more than anything else I teach, I want breadth and I want synthesis. And for those goals, a Blue Book exam is really unparalleled. Now, I encourage students to use AI appropriately as they're preparing for the exam. The explicit instructions I give to them are if it's ethical for another person, another student to do it, it's generally ethical to do it with AI. And some students have done this to great effect, incorporating AI as a tutor for the course readings. On the other hand, in the other class I teach, one of the other classes I teach, an AI Revolution class, I go often the other direction, where in many of these assignments, students have to learn basic prompting skills, prompt engineering skills, and often they're working collaboratively with AI as part of that process. That's because the teaching goals are very different. One of the assignments I assign students, and it is the lowest graded and most annoying assignment in the class, I assign them an essay that they are not allowed to write one single word of. That they have to show me that every single word in that assignment is written by AI. They can copy and paste, but AI has to write every single bit of it. And that is actually a very challenging assignment. So I think that the bottom line is that when we're dealing with AI, I think it forces us to go back to our core goals and especially our core values and think, given what we know about the current state of the AI landscape, how can we best implement those? And then, because we know that things are changing and a lot of this is experimental, we have to commit to iterating, to learning from what worked and what didn't, trying to understand how the technology continues to evolve, and maybe doing it differently next time.
That sounds a lot like standard teaching, where it's an iterative process, learning for the faculty too.
Fair enough.
How about you, Bibi?
I mean, I feel like I'm on this panel because I'm a total technophobe. So like you're writing books about the internet and I work on craft, for example. And I was like, what do I know about teaching with AI? But like you have to, like as part of your teaching, you have to deal with it. So I feel like I'm here to say like, okay, well, I put on my syllabus I think, sort of friendly thing saying you can't use AI when you're writing your papers. So I said that, which maybe I'll change in a few years, but like currently that's my policy. But then I teach like a lot of writing in like WID classes and writing intensive classes, and I do lots of scaffolding with all these assignments. And so I've been able to build in some experimentation with AI with my students, which maybe is an answer to a different question. I don't know if I should talk more, maybe I'll chime in again more about that. But that's sort of like where I'm at.
Okay, so we have technophobe, and then we have the physics faculty member. Okay.
Okay, so my experience with AI, it's actually started a while ago. Due to the nature of my research, I have to work with a lot of data, like from space telescopes, for example. And in that area, people started using machine learning, which is kind of AI too, which may be broader a little bit, but long ago. And so I was exposed to this for a while, before these popular large language models like ChatGPT appeared on news and everywhere. And so for me, it was a natural kind of transition into start basically using these new tools. And I also try to tell students that they actually should take as much as possible advantage of those tools. So if you are talking about syllabus, for example, in my syllabus I have like best practices for them, and it is very, very few. There is a couple restrictions on what they cannot use AI for. right? So I'm basically encouraging and trying to tell them that it is a very powerful assistant, that they should think every task they get, they should think if they can actually solve at least partially the task using help from AI. So I kind of like push them in that direction, actually. So now you can say that maybe it affects like how much they actually put effort themselves or how much they think, because they transfer it all to AI. But what can happen then, if you have this powerful assistant, then you can give them more complex tasks to the students, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to solve those tasks if there would not be that assistant, right? And if you give them more complex tasks, that challenges them more. And they actually are able to solve them, surprisingly to me, somewhat. So with the help of AI. Because there's some, I think this is maybe just comparison that everyone's making, but these calculators or personal PCs, computers, they were invented at some point, right? And now people are maybe not so good in dividing and multiplying numbers because they actually kind of don't do it anymore. But we are not getting hopefully more like think less because we have those calculators. We think about something else, right? So there is some. It's not direct analogy, but I feel like there is some analogy there.
Jessica. Yeah, so I love hearing what you all have said, and I think we're all sort of getting to the same point, which is that it's really dependent on the learning objectives of the class, on what you're trying to get your students to take from this. For me, as I teach first year writing and research, and then I teach upper level writing in the disciplines courses in communication and university writing. And for me, I really want my students to understand, and I'm only working with large language models, no other AI. I really feel like my teaching has evolved every semester since ChatGPT came out, and I assume that will continue to happen forever. Now, and so we've been in the writing program really sort of immersing ourselves, most of us anyway, to try to think about how we incorporate these tools to support what we already do and have students think really rhetorically about them, right? Try to have our students understand the capabilities, the limitations, and I focus a lot on those limitations. And as I think it's really changed for the better the way a lot of folks are designing assignments, myself included. Really thinking about like where am I okay with them using this for something like the parallel to multiplication, right? Like where can I let them use this to get a running start, and then think really critically about the more complex argument that's happening beyond that. I ask students a lot how they use it, and I have a pretty open policy in my classroom that they can use it in any capacity they want, as long as at the top of formal papers they tell me how, why, what prompt. And I feel like for me that's information gathering, like what was the part that felt either tedious or too hard for them? What did they struggle with that maybe we didn't do well enough with in class that they thought this makes sense to turn here? And then depending on the assignment, I have them engage with it in different ways. So for some assignments, for instance, this comm class I'm teaching right now, and I'll talk about that assignment in some more depth later maybe, but they have to actually write an AI policy for an organization. So they have to really think about what are the risks for this particular organization, what are their goals, what are the privacy issues, what are the values of this organization. So they have to do this really deep dive to understand AI better. And that's more than anything what I want them to take from this, right? What are its strengths, what can I rely on it for, and why am I still the most important part of this process even if I'm using it? And then for other types of assignments, it's banned because I do a lot of community engaged work, and that's a moment where I think we're going to just put a really hard stop. And they seem to understand that after the conversation in class.
So you all come from different disciplines and backgrounds. So the next question really sort of probes that a bit. So how does the approach you're taking in your class and in your teaching draw from the values, purposes, and knowledge of your particular disciplines? Of varied disciplines, probably varied approaches. So how does your approach in using AI in the classroom draw from sort of disciplinary norms, if you will? Okay, Oleg?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I'm natural sciences, not liberal arts. So there is some difference there. So for example, we kind of work a lot with data and like analyze data, check some kind of laws of physics or something using data. And so this is specific to not only my discipline, I think chemistry or maybe biology. So and then a lot of the work is is in testing some kind of hypothesis, and so that's where the thinking is, right? They have to come up with some kind of hypothesis, but then there is a lot of tedious, I would say, work which doesn't really require a lot of intelligence. It's a data gathering, for example, right? So where do I find the right data to check my hypothesis? It's a huge data. How do I work with it? How do I check for some correlations, some kind of statistical properties, and so on? So that is actually usually boils down to writing a code. Yeah, and so it used to require, students to take couple courses in coding, Python or something. But now it's not necessarily the best investment of their time, because they can outsource this, and the AI can go and find actually data online for them that's most suitable for checking some kind of hypothesis. They can actually, as long as they can explain what kind of code they would like to have to test something, it can write the code in Python, there's no problem. In this sense, it actually introduces more equality between students in my class. Some of them have better preparation in coding. It just depends where they come from, what's their previous experience, and some less preparation. But now they become suddenly kind of equal in that aspect, which is maybe not so critical for what I'm teaching, because the critical part is coming up with some kind of interesting original hypothesis. And so it really saves them a lot of time, I feel. I don't want to take more time. Just let others to answer.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Jessica,
Sure. Sure. I mean, I think in writing studies, I feel kind of lucky because the pedagogy is so baked into our discipline from the get-go, and so much of our research actually, works with pedagogy. But for me, I'm teaching writing process, and I'm teaching deep rhetorical analysis in everything I do. And so this is a way to sort of engage them in thinking about process, in revision, in assessment and analysis in some really interesting ways, right? So for instance, we can have, in the same way that I have in the past, shared previous students' papers, right? And we might go through them as a class and say, what are the strengths? What can you draw from this? What would you do differently? How would we think about this? Now I sometimes have them put the prompt into ChatGPT, and I try to get them to get the best paper they can get out of it, right? And then we assess that. And it's not yet been an A paper. We've not agreed yet that it's an A paper, which I think means my prompts are working the way I want them to. But I think this focus on process and this emphasis in my discipline that you don't write something and then it's done. No one writes that way. No one who writes well writes that way. And so this can be a piece of it. This can be a piece of the process, but it's absolutely not going to give you a finished product unless you're writing code or you're doing something different with it.
Even then.
Even then, yeah.
So this is a great question. And I would answer a couple different ways. I think that part of the values of my discipline as a social scientist, right, as a scholar of political science and communication, is to look at the data first, to understand what the impacts are empirically as much as we can of using these technologies, and to try to adapt our teaching to follow the lessons such as they are for these technologies. Now there's a lot of interpolation there. These are new technologies, but I think that is an obligation first. Second of all, I think there is very strong norms about about the importance of owning your own ideas and being responsible, on the one hand, of talking about where ideas come from. And so part of my assignments are designed to make sure that all of the work of AI is auditable and that it is clearly described in the text. I think that's a really important norm. And it's not just a nice to have so students aren't cheating. It also, just as importantly, prevents sloppiness on the part of students and ultimately produces stronger work. Lastly, I think our values are not just sort of disciplinary values. Our values as professors of the liberal arts are first and foremost to teach the knowledge and skills required of a free people. That is the core of liberal arts teaching. And today that requires facility with artificial intelligence. That not knowing about AI is essentially abdicating roles in leadership, in government, in the workplace, in a whole host of other areas. We want to have students leave GW and not just to get that first entry-level job, which is important. We certainly want that too. But in the longer term, we want to enable them and empower them to be leaders across the host of fields that they would pursue. And for me, that requires engaging with this technology from the very beginning.
I hear you. It's true. It's true. But again, I'm in a different place. But so in my assignment, in like fall of 2023, like the first time my TA and I were like, what are we going to do with this? I was teaching the history of photography. And so this is an example of an assignment where it was kind of farcically bad, and we could, like, as part of the scaffolding, we could laugh. We were working with Gelman's special collections in photography, and there was a photograph that the students were one of the building blocks of art history is visual analysis. You look at things and you describe them, and that's important visual evidence for high quality art history. So they're working with actual these photographs in the collection, and there's a photograph of Andy Warhol and AI. Then we fed it in so that see what they came up with, and ChatGPT or whatever. I don't even know what it was, but anyway, so they fed it in, and they thought it was like a 30-something-year-old woman, and all my students knew it was Warhol, but AI did not. So we all laughed, and we were like, oh yeah, obviously you can't write your papers with this because it's not working. But then, this past semester, I'm teaching a seminar with graduate students on disability accessibility in the arts, and I was getting them to do image descriptions. So it's something the National Gallery of Art is doing, and we got trained, and it's not quite alt text. It's more, for people who are visually impaired, and how do you look at an image? How do you help someone who's visually impaired look at an image? Maybe they're blind, maybe they're visually impaired, and so it's a very thorough description, but without sort of any extraneous information anyway. So they did this, and then they fed them in, and what images got produced, and that was like, some of them were really funny, and some of them were actually really helpful because they were like, oh, I didn't mention this extra tree, and like that's actually really important. I mean, minor, but it was actually, and this all came from the students because of course I was like, oh, what's happening? But the students are already, ready to go and use this as a kind of calculator.
That comment, Bibi, about Andy Warhol and what AI or ChatGPT made of that image really makes me think about bias in the system. And so how do you then think about or talk to your students, prepare them for ethical use of these tools?
We read the studies. I mean, we read about the bias that's baked in, and we really have those conversations in the classroom about, if this thing is trained on the internet, what do we know about the internet? It's a cesspool, right? So we have to be really cautious and really, really thoughtful. And then we they seem to sort of latch onto that very quickly. I thought it was going to be more of a struggle to sort of make that argument to them. But once you show them the headlines, the studies, they're pretty attuned to it and much more cautious about it, I think. Same with the environmental concerns that we have around it. I don't think it changes, it doesn't stop many of them from engaging with it, but I definitely think it makes them more critical about how much they're using it and the ways in which they're analyzing what they get from it and being really very cautious in a good way. Yeah.
All right, another question for you, sort of the connection with the liberal arts. So how does AI or emerging technology connect to the liberal arts learning objectives that I outlined at the beginning, or others that you might want to discuss? So how does it connect to the liberal arts learning objectives that you want your students to develop? That's part of the learning objectives for your course. So whether that be critical thinking, scientific reasoning, or what have you. Who would like to start this one? Oleg?
Yeah. So it's again, I think there's a paradigm shift here. So students, in my opinion, now need to develop a skill of interacting with AI efficiently, then evaluating critically what they get from it, And that's the critical thinking, right, part right there. So is it always right? No. How do I find out efficiently where it may be wrong, right? And how, for example, let's do the scientific thinking. So they should still check. I always tell them they are responsible for the product they're submitting to me, be it a research project with some components of AI they use. Well, finally, it's them. They are responsible for this. If AI did something wrong, it's going to be their grade that is going to be lower, not AI's grade, right? So they are responsible for example, if you're talking about scientific thinking, it has to be a logical flow there, and one thing logically follows from another. That's kind of what we have in natural sciences for sure, and also. If there is a testing of some hypothesis, it should pass all the tests. If it fails something, then we have to go to a different one. So that's the natural way of scientific thinking. That should be right there, right? And AI not necessarily always follows this because it never really learns the rules of logic. Logic meaning like science of logic, right? Mathematical logic, right? And it never really learns like what exactly are the axioms or rules of scientific thinking. It just picks up the general way how people do it by looking at all this huge number of documents people put online. And because on most of them, but not all, people follow logic and scientific perhaps thinking, then it most of the time will probably produce things that follow scientific approach, but not all the time. And so in the end, students have to analyze the product that they get.
Their name is on the assignment.
Right.
I mean, I would say also that, I mean, I feel like I focus a lot on critical thinking, and so sort of, of a piece with that, I mean, in some ways, having students have to deal with this. And they're the critical thinkers who are engaging with this, and so that actually makes our job in some ways easier because they can see how this is something their generation is going to be grappling with in new ways. And then I think also this sort of what you were saying about doubling down on certain things. I feel like when you teach writing, voice is very important. And so your voice, I tell them it's about the craft and it's messy, the craft of writing, and it's messy. And I want to see them processing and struggling and grappling. And if it's a hard idea, your writing is going to be maybe messy, but I want to see that. And I've always said that, but now with the contrast of AI, it's sort of more visible to them that's oh, that's what you mean. You want to see me writing, you don't want to see AI writing.
So I think this is really tricky. One of the things that we have, I think now, pretty overwhelming evidence now, is that for argumentation, AI is now superhuman. It can produce much more persuasive arguments than a typical human. A recent study, very controversial study, just this past week, unauthorized use of bots on a real live Reddit forum, found that these bots were more persuasive than 99% of real users. So that day to day is what students are encountering on digital platforms. And in many ways, that can be a helpful tool, forcing students to engage with that with a whole host of different arguments that they would not have been able to anticipate or to develop themselves. That also provides opportunities for strengthening creativity. We now have a number of, this is less overwhelming, I think more mixed. We have a number of different studies that show that students who use AI produce stronger and more diverse, ultimately more creative output than students who don't. And we see a lot of that research replicated in the workplace as well. The teams that are given access to AI produce a broader and ultimately stronger set of ideas. But in order to do that well, you have to be trained. Without any instruction or training, the teams given use of AI produce things that are bland and sloppy and generally bad. And that's part of, and frankly, I'm sure most professors in this room have experienced that bland, sloppy, well, gee, why do these 3 students have exactly the same structure in their arguments? This is a different skill set than we are used to teaching. It requires a thorough grounding in values, as we've talked about, but it also requires teaching what might ordinarily be considered management skills, which is not something I'm used to teaching, frankly, to freshmen and sophomores. But fundamentally, a lot of the experience of working with these models is having them generate way more than a human could reasonably generate in the same amount of time, and having them make judgment about what's good, what's not, and be able to articulate why. So I think this is still, there's a lot that we are still working through, but I do think that there is some enormous potential benefits and also some really big pitfalls.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, as I think about what I want my students to gain from a liberal arts education, I'm so glad Bibi brought up voice, because I mean, I think the thing that I emphasize to my students, and we've all seen it in the same way we've seen this sort of similar structure of a handful of papers, is this idea that at least right now, AI is always going to write to the average, right? It's not going to have, you can cue it in to a particular audience, you can tell it who it is as a speaker, but it's still writing to the mean. Like, that is really what it's made to do. And so it can't come up with new ideas, right? It can make, if you tell it what the argument is, it can come up with amazing persuasive support. But that's not what I want my students to do. I want them to be the person coming up with creative new ideas. And so I think, again, I teach professional and technical communication. I want to prepare my students for the workforce. And I know that what you're saying is exactly right. The folks who are really adept with AI and working in teams and using it as a tool are incredibly effective. The folks who think that it's going to do their work for them, they fail miserably. And so I think being able to make those critical judgments and understanding its strengths and weaknesses, but trusting yourself more than you trust it, trusting your own brain more than you trust an algorithm, I think is the biggest thing I want them to take away from it.
Which you need with math too, right? Like it's like good, you need some building blocks with the math to make sure you didn't like accidentally totally flub up like what you put in.
Just to follow up on that, because I think this is a really important point. Right now, there's no consensus across different fields, different tasks, different skills about whether AI is going to be an equalizer or whether it's going to make the rich get richer. Because you can imagine various different scenarios, and in fact, we see evidence that follows each of them, right? You can imagine an AI impact where everybody gets about the same level of better in terms of output. You can imagine AI where it disproportionately raises the floor rather than the ceiling. Or AI, and we see this particularly in scientific fields from the research, where AI doesn't help those who are the worst performers, but dramatically increases the quality and the output of those who are the top performers. And figuring out exactly what makes the difference across these different scenarios, what kind of tasks, what kind of problems produce one outcome or the other, is still very much uncertain.
Yeah, if I may add just one more thing. I think it's a very interesting point that it actually helps the performers to perform even better. Because the important thing is for students to get used to this activity of actually thinking creatively and gain some fundamental knowledge and like be curious about things. So as long as they have those qualities, then AI will just basically dramatically, I think, amplify their output. I mean, it can save a lot of time for some kind of research project doing literature review for them. Because you spend a lot of time looking for papers and citations and putting them there. It's not effective, right? You can have AI do it for you. And then now it puts citations in the right places for the right sentence it takes and so on. But then they can actually spend time thinking creatively, like what's the next step from those conclusions that other people arrived at? Like where do you go next? So, yeah.
As I listen to each of you talk, there's some really interesting assignments and sort of course building materials that you could be using AI to sort of advance the objectives. So that leads me to the next question, which is, so how do you talk to your students about AI? Bibi?
I mean, I feel like we've already sort of been discussing that. I mean, I'm pretty open about not being the expert on AI, and just, but you know, like I think I do a pretty good job of like creating spaces for my students to talk about these things. I mean, I was thinking back to the ethics question, like when you teach the history of photography, when you get up to especially contemporary photography, and you're not just talking about art photography, like the ethics like sort of inevitably come up in terms of, you know, identification through photography. So yeah, I mean, I think all of what we've been doing, I don't know if I have any new insights.
I think that you have to talk about it, and I think you have to address it directly. You know, it's easy enough in a class that's on AI. I'm going to obviously be talking a lot about AI. But I think even in classes that aren't nominally about AI at all, I hear an awful lot of anxiety. Certainly there's lots of other reasons why students might be anxious. But AI is, I think, a significant and increasing part of their worry about where the world is going. And frankly, there are reasons why those worries are not groundless. We do have some reason to believe that AI is starting to impact particularly the entry-level rungs of the job market, some fields especially. So I think that part of if we want students to prioritize their own learning, it's incumbent upon us to find ways to dial down the competitive pressure. Because if students think that all that matters is the specific paper that they produce, and if they're already anxious, they're going to be more likely to trust AI's judgment over their own, and to engage in behavior that ultimately is going to lead to dependence and ultimately less learning. So our ability to sort of dial things down a little bit, to meet them where they are, to validate their concerns, but also to talk about and build their own agency and how they're going to respond to this, I think is critical. But the other thing that I really want to emphasize is that the most important ingredient isn't raw intelligence, right? It's curiosity. And that, I think, and finding ways to spark that and encourage that and foster that, I think is a really important key to success.
And the agency that you're saying,
Yeah.
like with AI, you're saying it could go either way. Like it could help the rich get richer, the poor, you know, like, but humans, it's how we deal with AI. It's not like inherently the technology. Like we've dealt with many technologies, and they've had different effects depending on the systems that humans create.
So that's right, but I'm not holding my breath for comprehensive, detailed, thoughtful AI regulation.
Because of who we are as humans and the systems that we have in place.
I mean, the worry is that if these tools actually work, and spoiler alert, I think they're going to, that in any competitive field, anything that's life or death or highly competitive, they're going to be forcibly adopted even by people who would prefer not to. That's true with medicine, that's true with geopolitics and warfare. And if we turn our college into that environment, that's going to be us too. So I think we need to be cautious about how we're doing that. We're lucky compared to a lot of other schools and a lot of other and specific fields. But I think that this is a real concern that we need to be. Students feel like they're going to be forced to use AI no matter what, and many of them find it depressing. And that's, I think, something that their concerns are valid about.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, I think in the classroom it has to be an ongoing, constant conversation, and it has to be, for me at least, teaching a first-year writing course, it has to be a really open conversation. I mean, I give the big disclaimer, like anything you tell me will not leave this room. How have you used it in the past? And what's really interesting is I get a handful of students who say, I feel like this is hindering my learning. I don't use it at all. I get a handful of students who use it in the ways we all cringe and assume they're sometimes using it. But then I get these really, really thoughtful students, right? I love the sort of visual impairment text that you talked about, because I've heard similar anecdotes from students where they say, you know, I wanted to see if I had done a good job on this, and so I asked ChatGPT to critique it. Or I had a student say, I was writing a paper for a political science project. I really was struggling with finding what I needed, and it made it clear to me I didn't totally understand the concept, so I asked it to summarize it and then help me find some keywords. That's a great use of this, right? So in hearing the way that they operate with ChatGPT and continuing that conversation, not just once during the semester, but nearly constantly, right? At different moments in the process, and asking them how and why they might be shying away from it or engaging with it, they start to internalize this idea that the skills they need to be a good communicator are the same skills they need to critically analyze what's coming out of these large language models. So the anxiety that almost everyone has about writing, whether they're in school or in the workplace, you have to understand these rhetorical concepts and these ways of operating as a writer in order to, AI isn't going to supplement, it can supplement it, it cannot take the place of it, because you need to understand those basic tenets of good writing in order to work with what it's giving you. And I think that, again, that's going to become more and more clear if more of us are talking about it in the classroom, instead of just saying, like, no, you can't use this, you'll get kicked out of school, which is not serving them. So.
Yeah, in terms of pedagogy, I can maybe say how I started. I started with a survey, right, in my class about how much they know about this generative AI, you know, the ChatGPT, how often they use it, what for they use it, and so. And I see that there is actually a variety of experiences there. And then I talk to students, let's say, during office hours, more like for a longer time than just like the survey questions, to understand, you know, how much they really know about it, because there is a lot to know how they can use it. I mean, I don't want to get technical here, but for example, they can make AI work only with the you know, text or data that they give it, without taking some knowledge from somewhere else, for example. You know, I think they should know about different ways of how they can tweak it or change something to get what they want out of it. And not many actually students, let's say at undergraduate level, know that they can do certain things with these large language models fairly easily to make them do what they want. And the other thing is this AI, you can easily make it, sort of build it into the learning process. You can say, you can do whatever you want, but at the end of your report, you have to have some original ideas, and like it has to be original. That actually discourages them to simply ask AI to write the whole report, because they understand, and maybe it is good to explain them in the very beginning, that AI will likely produce the same or similar response with words maybe reshuffled differently for other students. If everyone in class asks to write like report on that topic, more or less the same report likely will be for everyone. And so they understand that it's not going to be original there. Maybe I'm not going to get a good grade, so I better actually have some part that I put my thinking into. So you can use this kind of tricks to build this in. Yeah.
Well, that comment, Oleg, leads me to the next to the last question. So, spoiler alert, there are 2 questions left. So, one, ethical considerations. So what limits do you put on AI use, if any? Why and when do you limit its use? So why don't we start with you, Oleg?
All right. So, well, previously, maybe a year ago or more, I had an issue with using AI for like letting students write reports for the first, let's say, part, where this is usually a literature review of what was done, because it wasn't really properly putting citations, and that was wasn't good. Yeah. Now, actually, at least some of these large language models, they are able to put citations, and I tried myself many times, that you click, you arrive at the right paper where the text is taken from. So yes, actually, I think I'm much more comfortable with having students use AI to write parts of their research project paper or something like that, that part, like a literature review. And so as long as it's properly cited, I think it takes care of certain issues that otherwise would be there if they say submitted to the journal and it's not properly citing previous work. The other thing I require them, I actually encourage kind of to actually declare where exactly and what for they used AI. It's in the syllabus, it's in this best practices. Moreover, I basically would like to know about their, I ask them about their experience. Did they like it? You know, was it produced for them? Was it savings of their time? Is that like how useful it was from their perspective? So it's not like I'm sounding like I'm going to punish them. As actually, I want to learn about their experience using AI. And then they happily, at least some who use, they happily talk about it, I think. So, from the ethical standpoint, as long as they declare what they used it for, I mean, fine for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but well, I'll say first that I never make them use it either. I think there are students with really valid ethical concerns, and so I never force them to use it in the classroom. There are projects we might do where I might demonstrate something, I might, copy text from it to show them something. And we talk a lot about the ethics around it, and again, we read about both bias, and then we talk about a lot of the sort of ways in which it's built, what text is it taking, privacy, copyright, all of these types of things quite a bit. But then, as I mentioned, there are times where I just say absolutely not, and that's when they're doing work for outside entities. So if we're working with a nonprofit, the risk of misinformation, of bias, of these things, if it's coming to me in a draft form, it's a great opportunity for us to sit down and have a conversation. If it's going to an outside client, we're not taking that risk. And they seem, again, we have those conversations, and often I will, I will ask it to produce something for our client just so I can show them how problematic it potentially could be. And that line seems to work for them. In my experience, they seem to be following it.
Yeah. The core rule of thumb, as I've mentioned earlier, is if it's ethical for you to do something with a person, it's ethical to do it with AI. And if it's not ethical to do it with a person, it's not ethical to use AI for it. And generally, I think that students get that. The other thing that's really important is documentation and disclosure of exactly how they used it. Well, this isn't always thought of as ethical. I think it's really important, much the way that Oleg does. I require students, when they're using AI, to have a critical assessment of how it performed. I think that is an important check to get them out of just critically accepting whatever slop it produces. Forcing them to be more critical tends to produce better results and ultimately changes their usage patterns.
Interesting. All right. So last question. So thinking about our students as they leave campus, commencement is coming up. Our students launch off into many different realms. So why is a liberal arts approach to AI important for students as they move from universities to careers? I'll take whoever wants to jump in on this one.
So I'll take this, or I'll start the conversation. Mm-hmm. What is prompting an AI actually doing? Like, what are you actually doing? What's the difference between a clear, successful AI prompt and one that is going to produce mediocre, poor results? The most important feature of successful AI prompting is clear, comprehensive, ordinary language. Language is how these models are programmed. And so for many liberal arts students, they at some point decided they weren't good at or weren't interested in math or hard sciences, and that they liked language, and so they think that AI is over there. Whereas the experience of many of these AI firms is the best prompters that they have on their payroll are liberal arts students, are people who are trained as writers, as social scientists, right? As historians, right? So I think that getting students to realize that the skills that they've built over a career at GW actually do very strongly transfer into this realm, I think is in a really important shift. And as they start doing this kind of work, I think many of them will find that they're very good at it.
I mean, just sort of to tag on to this, but how are we defining liberal arts? Liberal arts is everything at CCAS, right? Like, it's like having a well-rounded education, right?
That's the way I would tend to define it.
So, and that fits into what you're saying. So, I mean, so we seem to, like, sometimes at CCAS, we have this, like, antipathy between the natural sciences and the humanities.
Natural sciences.
And the social science. But, like, actually, what's wonderful about, like, how we're training students with AI is if we can, like, work together like you're forcing us to do here. But that's why, I mean, and that's what we're forcing the students, because they have all these requirements. We're forcing them to be trained, and then they're gonna be in interviews soon where they have to talk about, I mean, they're probably gonna get questions about this, and hopefully we'll have trained them to respond to those questions.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting point there from Bibi about the having a synergy between natural sciences and liberal arts. So AI is intrinsically cross-disciplinary in a sense of how you interact. It does not really depend whether you're natural scientist or you're doing liberal arts. As you mentioned, Matt, the prompt engineering, for example, it's there. It's for regardless whatever field you are in. And so it can be a basis for building some kind of multidisciplinary, more synergetic environment at liberal arts colleges, right? Because one of the important things that has been discussed for a while, including GW, is having a better interaction between different units in terms of having a cross-disciplinary interaction, right? And the AI can be kind of starting point or a glue or something for that. And I think, as everyone, I guess, agrees here, employers, and if you watch the news, you get this feeling, yeah, right? So the employers will be looking for employees that have some AI skills. That at least I'm firmly convinced that that's going to be the case. And so, in my opinion, we cannot avoid, like, we have to teach new generation of employees for whatever field they're going to, how to use efficiently AI. Because I've heard opinions that, for example, maybe it's difficult to compete with certain schools that are already far ahead, and we can maybe use some traditional ways of teaching, which still will be valuable. Of course, they will be, but I don't think it's a good idea to not to enter vigorously in a competition because it's just going to be so widespread, and the skill is going to be very much in demand by employers, I feel.
Jessica, would you like the last word on this?
Sure. I'll just sort of, I think, synthesize what everyone has been saying through this conversation, which is that critical thinking is central to the liberal arts, and you are never going to be successful with these AI tools unless that you have very, very strong critical thinking skills. And so I think everything that we are already sort of foundationally working with our students on applies here. And I think part of it is sort of making that meta argument to students about use, right? When I talk to folks out in the workplace, they all want to hire students who have some familiarity, but also understand and can think really, really critically about these tools. And as someone who had to make a real argument to my own parents about my liberal arts education and the fact that it was valuable, I think that arming them with that is part of this, right? It's allowing them to be really articulate about the ways in which they approach these tools and the skills that they've developed with this kind of an education.
Thank All right, we have about 5 minutes, so time for 1 or 2 questions. Pat?
Yeah, my question is really
Oh, here comes the microphone.
getting back to the concept of creativity, AI is not creative. I mean, human beings are creative, and I think the power resides with the human being, and maybe our students really need to understand that they are not just reacting to whatever's in there, but they are using whatever is in there to be creative on their own.
Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. Joel?
Yeah, thanks. I have a question about how do you show in an assignment that one of your ideas is not from AI? That is, I mean, one of the things that you've been emphasizing here really nicely is just the importance of creativity and coming up with new ideas of your own and so forth. Easier said than done. And it's, how do you go about doing that?
So the ideas at the idea level are very tough. We do have a number of tools that claim to detect AI-generated writing, and they are all terrible. They're all bad. They don't work, and more than that, they produce high-confidence false positives that are largely focused on specific categories of students, particularly those who learned English as a second or third language. That said, there is a fair amount of research now that people who use AI all the time are really good at recognizing it, even if they can't prove it. So if you spend a lot of time working with ChatGPT, there's something about the lilt, right? And even sort of the specific characters, right? Some of the specific characters that they produce are not on your keyboard, right? So they have to be copy and pasted. So there are tricks to sort of watermark these outputs. But ultimately, this is, I think that the challenge is that we are living in a world where identifying the sort of the root origin of an idea is pretty tough. And for some reason, and for a lot of instances, a lot of cases, that might not matter. So one of the challenges with AI is it can generate 50 ideas and has no idea which of the ones are the best. So there's still value in looking at a list of 50 or 100 ideas and picking out 1 or 2 and identifying them. And I think that that's a worthwhile skill to learn.
I would just add to that, although there are always going to be time constraints here, I think that having students sort of, we think about show your work as being a math thing, but in reality, having students reflect on the ideas that they've created and really try to explain and articulate the ways in which they came to them, be that in an accompanying reflective paper or within the actual argument that you're looking at. I think there's real value to that because it serves you if you're really worried about that, but it also serves them, right? To allow them more experience to actually sort of trace the origin of their own ideas and map that out.
I feel like I have a blathery, like I want to say something also. And one of the things I want to say is, creativity, originality, do we have original ideas? Even without, even bracketing, generative AI, that's been critiqued. And what is creativity? But it's something that we do want to engage in, that's pleasurable, and also in terms of how we've been going with this response. I feel like a lot of our assignments, yes, you want a product, one paper, but also you want to be able to talk about it on a panel, extemporaneously. And so if you didn't come up with it, you won't be able to talk about it and, figure out which of the answers, actually matters to you and other people.
Well, thank you. I know we could go on and on, and maybe we will continue to go on and on. But for now, I'm gonna thank the panelists. Thank you all for sharing your time and your experience. I want to thank the team here in SMPA for loaning us the studio, but being here also to film this. So we're recording it for posterity. So thank you all for coming, and look forward to talking continuing this conversation going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can feed the recording into